Oh look, another TEDx video, and you know how much I love those. This time around, Clementine Ford talks at an event in Australia about rape culture, which is always a good time for all. Now, I'll get this out of the way right here. She talks about some things that are Australia-centric, and I may not be up on cultural specifics, so I'm just going to answer those from an American perspective. I'm not trying to diminish anything about Australia, and if anybody wants to fill me in on the details in the comments, by all means feel free. I can only give the perspective that I actually have though, so deal. So anyhow, here's a talk about rape culture and the absurdity thereof as we go straight down the feminist rabbit hole.
What is rape culture? If you haven't heard the term before, rape culture is basically acknowledging that we live in a society that normalizes or diminishes rape through the bombardment of images, language, laws, and social attitudes.
Frankly, I'm unaware of anywhere that's true anywhere in the Western world. Now, sure, if you go to the Middle East, you can absolutely find a culture where they not only excuse rape, they celebrate it. But here, absolutely not. So long as rape is illegal, and it pretty much is everywhere in the first world, there's no such thing as rape culture.
It's a culture in which victim blaming is not just present, but common, and caveats like, well, what did she expect going home with him? And, oh, she was drunk, wasn't she? And, well, she slept with him before, and look at that skirt she was wearing, are routinely invoked to excuse perpetrators as having just kind of done what everyone would have expected them to do, done what a red-blooded Aussie male would do. Can't say fairer than that. I mean, she did go home with him.
Except that doesn't happen either. If it did, rapists would be let out of jail because, hey, what do you expect? But nope, they get locked up, kept out of society, and labeled forever as a sex offender. That's not acceptance of rape. That's not condoning rape. That's punishing people who are guilty of forcing themselves sexually on other people, male or female. But you know where these feminists get it entirely wrong? When they pretend that even looking at a victim sideways is somehow blaming them for what happened. That's not how responsible behavior works. But then again, feminism and being personally responsible are two paths that virtually never cross. Now, rape is a very emotional issue, so I want to sidestep that for the moment and talk about something entirely different. Let's say someone is driving down a winding road. They're going very fast, far too fast for the road conditions. They have not properly maintained their vehicle. Their tires are balding and their brake pads are far past needing to be replaced. This person skids into a tree and is gravely injured, being paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of their lives. Are we going to say that nothing they did contributed to the likelihood that they'd have such an accident? I certainly hope not, although with liberals you never know. Did this guy deserve his fate? No. Did he contribute to it? Absolutely. Should we still feel sorry for him and do whatever we can to help him? Of course we should, but we shouldn't pretend that bad decisions on his part didn't play a significant role in what ended up happening to him. That, according to the left, is victim blaming. It's pretending that the victim had no part in their own victimization, which just isn't true in many cases. Now, to use Clementine's examples, maybe someone shouldn't go out and get drunk. Maybe they should be conscious of what they wear. Maybe they should be more careful about where they go and who they go with. It's like saying that a person who runs down a dark alley with $100 bills hanging out of their pocket, screaming, he's rich, he's independent, bears no blame when someone in that alley comes out and beats him senseless and takes all his money. But that's the kind of thing that feminists, and indeed a lot of people on the left, try all the time.
It's that kind of language. It's the language of lawmakers who use words like honest rape and forcible rape and legitimate rape to portray the fact that they believe that there are actually two kinds of rape. There's the very, very, very small incidents of real rape, and then there are all of the overwhelming incidents of rape where women are actually just lying about it because they are so embarrassed by the fact that they've allowed something to enter their shame cave other than the Holy Spirit.
Now, yes, there are lots of religious assholes out there who haven't got a clue, but those people are all talk and really little legal action. What she says is true about the extremists on the religious right, but she doesn't talk about the extremists on the liberal left. There are plenty of people on her side of the aisle that couldn't care less about false rape accusations, who figure that it doesn't matter if a woman retroactively decides that the sex act she engaged in last night wasn't something she wanted to do, therefore it's rape. Men deserve it after all. Around 50% of all rape accusations on American college campuses turn out to be false, found to be baseless or retracted by the woman. Yet there is no feminist outcry over this. They just don't care.
So that's rape culture, and I'm just going to talk you through a series of examples now of what I think rape culture looks like, and some of them are local and some of them are international, because, yay, rape culture exists everywhere. We can all share it. So rape culture is Peter Spider Everett after the 2010 AFL Grand Final, responding to allegations. And it's very important, this word allegedly. You'll speak to people who don't believe that rape culture exists. And you'll speak to people who don't believe that men can ever be charged with rape because, of course, women are always lying. Very, very intent on protecting the due process of the legal system, only in cases of sexual assault where they remind you consistently that this just happened allegedly.
Now, maybe you're unaware of how the legal system works, and frankly, I don't know about the case you brought up, so I'm just going to go by the American legal system because I assume most of my listeners come from here or are at least familiar with it. A person has allegedly committed a crime until they've been taken to court, charged with a crime, tried and convicted by a jury of their peers. That is the only time they're actually legally guilty of the crime. Until then, it's just an accusation. It is an allegation. It is a legally unsubstantiated claim. That's how it works. Don't pretend it's some kind of conspiracy against women. It's legal terminology. Deal with it.
So, Peter Spider Everett, responding to the allegations after the 2010 AFL Grand Final that a sexual assault had occurred in the home of one of the Collingwood players. Now that has since been resolved, and if you do have a chance, do read Anna Crean's Night Games because it's a brilliant exploration of sex, power and culture. But him responding to that with the following tweet. Girls! When will you learn that at 3 a.m. when you go home drunk with a guy that it's not for a cup of Milo, allegedly? It's Kerry Ann Kennelly responding to that tweet by inviting Peter Spider Everett onto her show and sympathising with him over the poor fate of footballers who have strays throw themselves at them all the time and get them in trouble.
Now, again, I'm not going to forgive any kind of sexual assault, but yes, what do you expect? Why are you going to that man's house drunk? Is that an intelligent decision to make? I certainly don't think so. That doesn't mean you deserve to get raped, but it does mean that you've made a poor life decision that has potentially put your health and safety at risk, and you shouldn't do that. It's like saying that you're going to put on a blindfold and run out in traffic, and then complain when somebody hits you. Is it your fault? Maybe not, but you did do something stupid that dramatically contributed to the accident. Don't be stupid, and you reduce your likelihood of such things happening.
It's Channel 9 responding to the dismay and outrage, and I am grateful that it was given because not everyone likes to talk out about rape culture. But Channel 9 responding to that outrage by issuing a statement that said, in regards to the segment on Kerry Ann's show this morning, what she was talking about when she talked about strays was alcohol-fueled situations in which both girls and guys must take the blame. Rape culture is reducing rape to an alcohol-fueled situation. Rape culture is Channel 9 responding to these things with such dismissive tones that it reinforces to people that it's an alcohol-fueled situation and not an actual assault on their bodies.
Which, of course, it is. And any such assault for any reason is reprehensible. But that doesn't change the fact that people, both men and women, put themselves into dangerous situations by making poor life choices, and then feminists moan, "Oh, poor us! Why does this happen to us? It's not our fault. We had nothing to do with it." Of course you did. This isn't rape culture. This is irresponsibility culture. And that's one of the things liberals absolutely want to advance.
Looking further abroad, rape culture is Daniel Tosh, who's a comedian standing in front of a live audience and responding to a woman who'd taken umbrage at one of his jokes about rape by saying, wouldn't it be funny if like 5 guys just came down and raped this woman right now? Wouldn't that be hilarious? Rape culture is also his comedy mates then defending him because comedy is sacred and women's bodies aren't.
Comedy isn't sacred, but the point of comedy is not to take it seriously, and you people don't seem to understand that. I don't necessarily want to belabor the point, but there are an awful lot of people out there, both male and female, both liberal and conservative, who can't seem to get that through their heads. They get offended by what comedians say. Here's a hint for you. If you don't like what somebody has to say, don't listen. Don't go to the show. Don't turn on the TV. Be responsible for yourself. Also, there's a lot of comedy out there that is offensive on purpose. That's why it exists. And if you whine and cry and act all butthurt because you're offended, the comedian is going to offend you some more because that's what he's there to do. Figure the shit out.
Rape culture is raising boys in an environment and a society that teaches them that they have an entitlement to women's bodies. And that is how things like Steubenville, Ohio happens. That's how things like the Roastbusters in Auckland happens, where boys think that it is so much their right to treat a woman's body as they please, that not only will they do it in front of all of their friends, rape an unconscious woman repeatedly, but they'll film it. They'll actually document the evidence and put it on the internet for everyone to see what a big man they are.
And guess what? Those people went to jail. Now that doesn't excuse what they did by any means, but they were arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced for the crime of rape, among others. And you're acting like having justice done is somehow not enough. Yes, it would be preferable that no one was ever raped. It would be preferable that no one was ever murdered. It would be preferable that no one was ever robbed or molested or defrauded too. But that's just not the world we live in, and we have to accept that. We don't have to like it, but we have to deal with it as part of the world that we live in. That kind of rape that we saw in Steubenville is incredibly rare. That kind of gang rape by high school boys virtually never happens. It's horrible that it happened at all, but that doesn't make it rape culture any more than just because somebody gets killed by a drive-by shooting makes it a murder culture. Let's try for a little common sense, shall we?
Rape culture is reinforcing to young girls that they don't have the right to feel safe.
Here's a newsflash for you, lady. Nobody has a right to feel safe. Nobody is ever guaranteed safety, no matter who you are, where you are, or what you do. The idea of guaranteed safety is absurd. You have to be careful of everything that you do in your day-to-day life. Someone could always mug you. Someone could always hit you with their car. You could be struck by a stray bullet or a bolt of lightning. A tree branch could fall off and smash you like a grape. Safety is never a guarantee. Not for boys, not for girls, not for men, not for women, not for anyone. Stop pretending otherwise.
Rape culture is people telling women that protecting themselves from rape is like property theft. That, it's not that I believe that rape is okay, but, if you're going to leave your car parked on a street with the keys in the ignition and walk away, can you really expect that someone's not going to come along and steal it? And I say to that the two things that I think when I think, of people calling property theft into account for this is that, one, my vagina isn't a car. And if it was, I would have saved a lot more money in taxis over the years, and then I'd be able to fix its brake pads.
I don't know. You get a lot of women who treat their vaginas like clown cars, and I'm not just talking about the religious who haven't quite figured out what causes pregnancy yet. It's just as bad those women who metaphorically lay on their backs with their legs spread with a sign that says, open 7 days a week. If you're going to be responsible for your car, if you're going to keep it safe, if you're going to care for it and get regular service done and not leave it in places that it's likely to get stolen or damaged, how can you do any less for your vagina? And that means taking some responsibility for who you allow in there. Yeah, I know this is going to piss off a lot of the liberal irresponsibility crowd, but I don't care. A long time ago, I met somebody on an atheist IRC channel that I moderated, and we got to talking. She was 20 years old, and she'd been sexually active for 2 years, and in that time, she had 37 sexual partners, and she couldn't figure out why she was so unhappy and couldn't keep a guy. Yeah, think about that for a while. I'm sure it'll come to you.
But secondly, we're not disembodied from our bodies. Our vaginas aren't cars that we can walk away from and leave. The only way that analogy works is if I'm sitting in the car and you come and you open the car and you drag me out of it and you steal my fucking car.
And that's a thing that happens. Maybe not in Australia, but in the US, carjackings are not particularly uncommon. Some guy runs up, pulls open the door, throws you on the pavement, and takes your car. That's why you keep your doors locked. In fact, that's why most modern cars, when they are running, automatically lock the doors.
Your vagina is not a vehicle. But this is what rape culture looks like. Rape culture is pretending that rape culture doesn't exist. It's people preferring to believe that the women in their lives are potential victims rather than accepting that the men in their lives are potential predators.
It's amazing how much that sounds like a conspiracy theory, isn't it? Yes, 9/11 was a government plot, but the government doesn't want you to talk about it, do they? They want to pretend it isn't true. That proves it's true. It really is pretty ridiculous. And yes, women are potential victims. So are men. Men are victims of violent assault at a rate far higher than women. Yet feminists never talk about that. They're just not interested. It doesn't fit their victimhood narrative. And the vast majority of men are not potential rapists, any more than the vast majority of women are potential victimizers of men. Violence against men by their female partners is rampant, yet men, by and large, aren't paranoid about it. So why are so many feminists?
Because people like to talk about rapists as being evil monsters who lurk in the streets and shadows, and we, the women, have to protect ourselves against them. I'm not saying that rape is good, girls. I'm just saying, can't you just learn to take care of yourselves? Girls, when will you learn that the world is full of evil monsters and you have to protect yourselves? Rape culture is assuming that we haven't been raised protecting ourselves, believing in the state of our own vulnerability since the very days that we were first walking out away from our parents. And on that note, actually, the evil monsters, rape culture denies the reality of rape, that most of it doesn't happen on the streets. Most of it happens in the home. It's done to us by men we know, men we love, men we may even be related to. That's what rape culture looks like.
That's true of both men and women. If you look at child molestation, especially in a religious setting, boys are far more likely than girls to get molested by priests and ministers. But again, that's not something that feminists talk about because they just don't care. When you have female teachers molesting male students, all you get are crickets from the feminists. It doesn't matter to them. It falls outside of their narrative. 38% of all sexual assaults in the home are committed against men. And not a word from the feminists. They only care about what happens to women.
And so that's a very sort of somber kind of view of the world that we live in, but the world that people don't want to talk about because rape, it's not nice. We don't want to talk about it. It's not nice. It's not nice. It's a hemorrhoid removal operation on the television.
But it does get talked about all the time. It's a constant subject of discussion. But when it happens to men, that's when it doesn't get talked about. It gets ignored. Imagine that.
I was pretty scared coming here to do this talk today because it's quite daunting standing in front of a room full of people and sharing your ideas on things. Had a couple of nervous poos. Sorry, I forgot that women aren't supposed to shit. See, I'm shaking. We all get nervous.
It isn't that women aren't supposed to shit. It's that in polite society, there are bodily functions you're not really supposed to talk about. It's not just women, though. It's everyone. Men aren't supposed to walk into the boardroom and tell fart jokes either. It's crass and impolite, but Clementine here only cares about women once again.
But this is the thing, is that standing here in front of people, in front of an audience, anyone doing that, it's scary and it's a good kind of fear. And I want to be liberated by my fear. I don't want to be imprisoned by it. And this is what I think. You know, Paul mentioned a comment before talking about terrorism. I do think it's an act of terrorism to raise girls to believe that the world is not safe for them. Because what it does is it forces us to diminish ourselves. It means that we take up less space than we are entitled to. We live in a world where women are taught they do not have the right to walk down the street at night because they don't have the access to the same space as men. And I think that that's an act of terrorism. And I will not negotiate with terrorists on those terms. So I do not engage people in conversations about why women need to protect themselves or why our vaginas are like cars. I just don't tolerate it. And this is what we all have to start doing.
And there's that entitlement word. You're not entitled to anything. You are not entitled to be safe. You are not entitled to own any particular piece of real estate. Now I get what you're saying. You want girls to feel safe and secure, and that's fine. But the reality is, nobody is ever really safe. Nobody is ever guaranteed safety. Everyone has to have a modicum of fear because fear makes us careful, and being careful actually keeps us safer. Not safe, safer. I think it's actually a good idea that everyone, man and woman, boy and girl, to have a bit of fear that makes them aware of what's going on around them. It keeps them from taking their safety and security for granted. It makes them look out for things that just don't seem right. It makes them question things that seem out of place, and it makes them consider the consequences of their actions and the actions of those around them. This is a good thing. Of course, you don't really want to go too far the other way into abject paranoia either. That's unhealthy. But you have to have a realistic view of the world around you as it actually exists, not as you wish in your heart of hearts that it existed. You should have a little fear when you're walking down that dark alley at night. It might make you reconsider going that way. You should be aware of people's motives, and if someone seems a little too friendly or is getting a little too close, you should know when to walk away or seek out a safer space. You should be aware what kind of attention your dress or your behavior is going to draw. And if that's not the kind of attention you want, don't dress that way and don't act that way. It's not that hard. You're not entitled to absolute safety. You actually have to work at it. But just because Clementine doesn't like that idea doesn't mean that she just gets to pretend that the necessity for self-preservation and self-protection aren't important. It's not terrorism, it's common sense, and yeah, I know that's a problem for a lot of liberals.
I have a boyfriend, which I know is kind of crazy because as a, obviously radical separatist lesbian feminist, as a lot of my fans on Daily Life call me, I'm not supposed to have a boyfriend, but, I did fashion him out of gingerbread and bring him to life with a black voodoo magic swirling around in my devil's Datsun. But he exists now, and it still counts. And he often says to me, can we just make it through one dinner where you don't talk about rape? To which I reply, can we just make it through one of Earth's rotations around the sun where I can walk on the street with as much right to safety as you just because you have a penis?
So, you mean all those guys with penises that get mugged and robbed and are the victims of far more violent crime every single day than women are? A man is much more likely to get attacked on the street or be the victim of random violence than a woman. Even in a relationship, the amount of violence perpetrated against men by women outnumbers the amount of violence perpetrated by men against women. So where is this entitlement that she can't walk down the street without being safe like men? Please produce those statistics for me.
And actually, statistically speaking, based on what we know about male-on-male violence, he is less likely to be safe on the streets than me. But that's not the way that we talk about violence and safety. It is convenient for people to make women afraid because it keeps us controlled.
See? She even knows that her rhetoric is wrong, but she still keeps trying to make it all about women and women's issues, even though the situation is nowhere like she pretends that it is. Nobody makes women afraid. Women choose to be afraid. The only control out there is self-imposed. Welcome to modern-day feminism, folks.
I understand that rape makes people uncomfortable. A lot of things make me uncomfortable. For example, I am uncomfortable with the fact that millions of girls and women are raped around the world each year, and only a handful of them ever see justice prevail. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that because of the work that I do, I stand in front of an audience like this, and I automatically think, which third of this audience has experienced sexual assault or violence or rape?
Oh, look, assumptions that are totally unjustified. I'm sure you didn't look out into the audience and wonder just how many men have been abused by their female partners. Why? Because she just doesn't give a damn about men. This just goes around and around and around.
And I'm uncomfortable with the fact that of that proportion of the audience, all of them will have been socialized at some point that you don't talk about these things in polite society. And I'm uncomfortable with the fact that as a white middle-class woman, it's hard for me to talk about rape. But it's even more difficult for a woman of color, a disabled woman, a woman who's a sex worker, a woman who's living in poverty, a woman who doesn't live here. it's harder for those women to talk about something which is already hard for me to discuss. I'm uncomfortable with those facts. I get it. Rape is uncomfortable.
Apparently, not so much, since you do go around standing on stages before crowds talking about rape. Whether or not something is uncomfortable is no excuse not to address it if you think that it's important. I spend a lot of time talking about the absurdity of religion. It's one of those things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company, religion and politics. Funny, rape isn't on that list. However, I still do it, and I don't let it bother me that a lot of people would really love to shut me up because my disagreeing with them makes them feel uncomfortable. But being comfortable all the time isn't a particularly good way of solving the world's problems. So, a lot of us do spend our time being critical of the irrational beliefs of the religious, even when you get the crazed liberal left telling us to shut up because we just might offend somebody. Too bad. Your offense doesn't override my right to free speech, and it certainly doesn't override the truth. Maybe these feminists ought to give that a shot.
But this is why we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep disrupting people's comfortable lives with it. Because the result of that is that they actually do start to change. In all of the time that I've been writing about rape, in all of the emails that I've gotten from, peeling through the ones that say to me that I'm just jealous because no one wants to rape me because I'm too ugly. Because, of course, the only thing worse than being raped is being considered not pretty enough to be raped. Right, Tracy? In all of that, I also get emails from young girls that inspire me, who tell me that the things that I've written and the things that other women like me have written about rape, bringing this conversation into the national dialogue, have let them realise that they're not responsible for what happened to them. It's made them realise that it's not their fault. But even better than that is the emails I get from men who tell me that something about this conversation that we're having now has changed the way that they view the world. It's made them realise how privileged they are. It's made them realise how much entitlement men generally have to space and safety. And it's made them want to change things for the better.
Yeah, only if they're a bunch of self-hating manginas whose liberal attitudes have made them detest who they are and bow down to their feminist overlords. Of course, I agree that anything we can do to make things more equal or to improve the situation for anyone, male or female, black or white, gay or straight, or any combination in between, that's a positive thing, and we all ought to try our hardest to bring about that change. But when you've only got one very vocal side who's only concerned with one side of the argument, who's blatantly sexist, who ignores the problems of one side because they only care about the other, that's a massive problem. Those people ought to be called out for their abject sexism, but as should come as no surprise, they don't want to hear it. They're not interested in actual equality. They just want to catch up where they're behind, but where they're ahead, they want to keep that advantage. They only want to talk about the things that fit their narrative. They want to push an agenda that supports their side, but stay completely silent on anything that fails to support their movement. That's why I find little worthwhile in modern-day feminism. Not because I don't support equality for all, but because I care about more than just the rights of women, and they do not.
I received an email from a friend of mine the other day, or I say friend, but we went to school together. So, we haven't talked really in 20 years, but we're Facebook friends because that's how people catch up these days. And he sent me an email out of nowhere with a link to a meme, and it was just a Venn diagram of this is what causes rape. And it's things like alcohol, clothing, attitudes, rapists. And the rapist was in red, and the whole Venn diagram was in red. Because the only thing common to all experiences of rape is a rapist. That is the only thing that we can say causes rape, is a rapist. And the way that we talk about rape, as if it's some kind of arbitrary thing that just happens to women, that we just walk out of the door one day and just accidentally step in a puddle of it because we weren't paying attention, that's how we remove responsibility from the problem. And I believe that to fix the problem, you have to name the problem.
But that's just simplifying things down to an absurd degree. All she's trying to do is find a single root cause for all the problems so that nobody ever has to talk about it anymore. But it's a lot more complex than that. There are a lot of things that people can do to stop, or at the very least, lessen their chances of being raped. No, you can probably never completely eliminate your chances, just like I can never completely eliminate my chances of being mugged, but you can take steps that may lessen your chances. Of course, you'll get the feminists whining that their freedom to be utterly irresponsible is being infringed upon. But there's a flip side to freedom, and that is responsibility. You have to be responsible for your actions, whether you like it or not. Of course, being liberals, they want nothing to do with having responsibility. They want the world to be full of magical ponies and rainbows where everything is handed to them on a silver platter and they never have to want for anything or try to get anything, and this is why liberals are such idiots.
And I was really inspired by that email that he sent me because it showed me that this guy, who I would say is kind of like pretty much your average Australian bloke, you know, he likes sports and he's a pretty good guy, he's kind of like on the middle of the fence politically. He doesn't have to be engaged in these topics because society enables him to not be engaged in them. But he has chosen to become engaged because of the things that he's been reading and because of the things that he's been hearing. And it means that he wants to change the world around him for the better.
Or he knows you're a fanatic on the subject and he's sending you something that he came across because he knows you'll like it. But nah, he's got to be solidly on your side, right?
And I'm really inspired by that. And I think that that's why we need to keep talking about these things, even though it makes people uncomfortable, even though people don't like to think about it, even though they like to pretend that it doesn't exist. Because I would rather people be uncomfortable about rape than be complacent about it. Thank you.
Hey, I'd rather have the discussion too, but I'd rather have the whole discussion, not half of the discussion like a lot of feminists want. They only want their narrative out there. They only want their side of the story told. If men want to point out that women aren't the victims every second of every day, they get screamed at. They get told to shut up. They get fire alarms pulled at meetings so they have to evacuate. They call in bomb threats. There's just no end to the horrible things that feminists have done to keep their story the only story that gets told. And it's because of this ridiculous grandstanding that goes on that people get sick and tired of feminists, as well they should. When their message comes down to only female lives mattering, only female rights mattering, only female problems mattering, there's a problem, and it's a problem that modern feminists are only too happy to perpetuate. So no, your vagina may not be a car, but it's still something that you're responsible for, and it's something that you ought to take steps to protect. You're only a victim if you insist on it. That's the narrative that feminists push, and I say it's time to push back. Thanks for hanging around. I know this was a long one, but I appreciate you spending the time. If you have any comments, please let me know below. You can also like, subscribe, and share the video anywhere that you like. It's okay. I don't mind. If you have any other videos that you'd like me to take on, send them to me at this email address. Please make sure that they aren't too long because those videos are really, really hard to do. So until next time, take care of yourself and be responsible for yourself. It really does work if you don't pretend that you're a perpetual victim, forever in fear of others doing bad things to you.